In fairy tales, death often appears suddenly and without warning. A hero collapses in the middle of a quest. A princess falls into an enchanted sleep. A character is swallowed by the earth, the sea, or a monster. But curiously, they do not stay dead. They return, transformed, awakened, somehow more than they were before. This is not the death of the body. It is the death of the former self. Marie-Louise von Franz, expanding Jung's psychological interpretations, reminds us that fairy tales speak in the language of symbols. And when we see a symbolic death in a story, we are witnessing the collapse of an inner structure, a version of the ego that must be surrendered to allow for inner growth. It's not an ending, it's a passage. In this symbolic world, the old identity must die so that something deeper, truer, and more whole can be born. Think of it. How often in life are we forced to let go of who we thought we were? When a relationship ends, when we lose a job or a role, when life surprises us with suffering, something breaks inside. We grieve not only what we lost, but who we were while we had it. These moments feel like death. And that is precisely what fairy tales show us, in the form of a poisoned apple, a broken mirror, a forgotten name. The self is shattered or stilled, and it must pass through darkness before anything can begin again. But here's the secret. The death is never the final act. It is, rather, the beginning of a deeper becoming. This symbolic death removes the false certainties. It strips away illusions. It pushes the hero or heroine to the edge of the known world, where logic and control no longer work, and something new must be born from within. Fairy tales knew this long before psychology did. They whisper, "You must lose yourself to find yourself. You must die to truly live." So when we encounter symbolic death in a story, we are not being told that life ends. We are being told that transformation begins. And for anyone on the path of inner growth, that is not a tragedy. It is a necessity. Every fairy tale begins with a rupture, a crisis, a shift. Something breaks the pattern of ordinary life. A king falls ill. A mysterious letter arrives. A child is cast out into the wilderness. This is not random. This is the call. The call to transformation rarely comes gently. Marie-Louise von Franz observed that this moment marks the psychological beginning of the individuation process, the journey of becoming oneself. In the symbolic logic of fairy tales, the hero or heroine cannot remain in the comfort of the known world. Something must interrupt their reality. And often, it is painful. Why? Because transformation doesn't happen when we are safe. It happens when the ground beneath our feet gives way. Jung called this the archetype of the journey, a universal structure where the ego is summoned to confront what lies beyond its current limits. And in stories, this is often triggered by an event that destabilizes everything: the loss of a parent, the threat of death, betrayal, exile, illness. These events don't just move the plot forward. They shatter the illusion of permanence. Psychologically, this is the moment we realize: the life I have been living no longer fits who I truly am. But we may not yet know who that is. This is why the call to transformation feels terrifying. It asks us to leave behind roles we've relied on, roles that may have once protected us. In a modern sense, this may come as a divorce, a spiritual crisis, burnout, or even the sudden awareness that we've been living someone else's idea of our life. And so, just like the hero in the tale, we resist. Fairy tales often show the hero hesitating, refusing, or wandering aimlessly after the call arrives. They delay, they flee, But sooner or later, something forces them to act, to step into the unknown, to say yes to what they did not choose. This is not a choice in the ordinary sense. It's deeper. It is a surrender to a process that has already begun. When we finally respond to the call, when we cross the threshold, we begin to shed the skin of the false self. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Each challenge, each figure we meet along the way, reflects back what still needs to die within us so that something new may live. The call to transformation is never comfortable, but it is always necessary, because without it, we remain asleep in a life too small for the soul we are becoming. After the call has been answered, after the first steps are taken into the unknown, comes a moment every seeker dreads, yet cannot avoid. The descent, the silence, the confusion. This is the dark night of the soul. Fairy tales represent this phase with striking imagery. The hero lost in a dark forest, the heroine trapped in a tower, the wanderer swallowed by a beast or buried underground. Time seems to stop. All direction is lost. No one answers the cry for help. Marie-Louise von France interpreted these images not as fantasy, but as profound psychological truths. This stage symbolizes what happens when the ego loses control. When everything that once gave us identity, purpose, and structure dissolves. It's not just sadness, it's emptiness. This is the point in the journey where inner transformation truly begins, not in moments of clarity, but in the depths of despair. Here, the old self is not only challenged, it begins to disintegrate. And with it, so do our illusions about who we are, what we want, and what life owes us. Jung himself passed through such a night after his break with Freud, a time he described as an inward journey into the unconscious, filled with visions, chaos, and meaninglessness. It was not enlightenment. It was undoing. But through it, he discovered the roots of what would become analytical psychology. Many people today pass through their own versions of this darkness, times of depression, grief, anxiety, or spiritual dryness. Modern culture rarely honors these periods. We are told to stay positive, move on, be strong. But fairy tales tell another truth. Sometimes we must fall apart to come back whole. In this phase, guidance often comes from the least expected places. A talking animal, a wise old woman, a strange dream, a forgotten symbol. These figures represent the autonomous energies of the psyche, the self, beginning to rise from the unconscious. But first, we must sit in the dark. No shortcuts, no quick fixes, just the slow, painful melting of the false identity. In fairy tales, this stage often has no clear timeline. The protagonist may sleep for 100 years, wander in silence, be presumed dead, because psychologically, this space has no clock. It unfolds in soul time, and yet something is happening beneath the surface. Roots are growing downward. A deeper strength is being forged, not in action, but in surrender. The dark night of the soul is not the end of the story, but it feels like the end, for a reason. Only by passing through this sacred darkness can the light we seek come from within, not from above. It is the womb of transformation, and no true rebirth happens without it. At the heart of many fairy tales lies a timeless rhythm, death followed by rebirth. It appears so often across so many cultures that it cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Carl Jung recognized this as an archetypal pattern, one rooted not in culture, but in the human psyche itself. Marie-Louise von France, in her deep exploration of fairy tales, showed how this symbolic pattern is not merely about physical life and death, but about inner psychological transformation. The death we see in stories, the hero vanishing into the underworld, the shattered identity, is always the precursor to a new emergence. This is the archetype of death and rebirth. It is not linear, it is cyclical, and it is essential to the process of individuation. In Jungian terms, individuation is the journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self. But wholeness cannot be reached by simply adding new things to the ego. It requires subtraction, dissolution, the breaking down of false layers, outdated defenses, and rigid roles. And this breaking down, this dying, can feel terrifying. In many tales, this moment is dramatized vividly. A character is swallowed by a beast or sinks into a swamp. A young prince is turned to stone. A girl falls into a coma. These are not just dramatic plot points. They are metaphors for the loss of conscious control. The ego must surrender, and this surrender opens the door to something deeper. Jung called this the emergence of the self, a central, organizing force within the unconscious that transcends the ego and connects us to our inner totality. But the ego does not meet the self without cost. There must be sacrifice, a symbolic death. The beauty of fairy tales is that they guide us through this process without clinical language. They speak in images and emotions. They show us that after death comes resurrection. The beast spits the hero out. The stone prince returns to life. The princess awakens, not as the girl she was, but as someone changed, ripened, matured. Von Franz emphasized that these stories are not just fantasies. They reflect the deep truths of our own psychological evolution. Every time we shed an old identity, confront a fear we've avoided, or release a version of ourselves that no longer serves us, we are enacting this archetype. Even in modern life, the pattern remains. A crisis breaks us down. We descend into confusion or grief. We emerge slowly, renewed. The person who comes out is not the same as the one who entered, and that is the point. Death and rebirth in fairy tales remind us that transformation is not polite. It's not painless. It requires us to die to the life we thought we had, in order to live the life we are truly meant for. That ancient rhythm, die, descend, rise again, is not just the plot of stories. It is the secret shape of the soul's journey. In fairy tales, nothing is ever as it seems. A forest is not just a forest. It's a labyrinth of the soul. A witch is not just a villain. She's the face of buried instinct. A treasure is never found in plain sight. It waits hidden in darkness, guarded by monsters. These images are not random. They are expressions of the unconscious. Marie-Louise von Franz, building on Jung's insights, showed that the symbolic world of fairy tales gives form to the invisible dynamics of the psyche. And at the center of this symbolic world is the unconscious, a vast, autonomous realm that holds everything the ego has forgotten, rejected, or never known. The unconscious is not passive. It acts. It appears in dreams, emotions, fantasies, and, most vividly, in stories. In tales, it takes shape through archetypal figures: the shadow, the trickster, the wise old woman, the animal guide, the monstrous adversary. These are not just characters. They are forces within the psyche, surfacing to challenge, disrupt, or guide the ego. When the hero or heroine responds to the call and enters the unknown, they are stepping into the unconscious. And there, they must face what they have never faced before. This is why so many tales send the protagonist into a cave, a forest, a dungeon, or a faraway kingdom. These are symbolic containers for the unconscious, places beyond rational order, where strange events occur and ordinary rules no longer apply. And it is here that transformation truly begins. The unconscious presents trials, not to punish, but to provoke change. Each confrontation, a dragon, a riddle, a betrayal, mirrors an inner struggle. And through these encounters, the hero is stripped of illusion, pride, and fear. What remains is the seed of the authentic self. Jung taught that the unconscious is both dangerous and redemptive. If ignored, it can sabotage us through projection, compulsions, or emotional chaos. But if faced with courage and attention, it becomes the source of creativity, insight, and healing. In fairy tales, the unconscious is not conquered, it is integrated. The heroine does not destroy the witch, she learns from her. The hero does not kill the monster blindly, he often befriends it or discovers that it guards a hidden truth. This is the deeper wisdom of the psyche. What we fear most often holds the key to our becoming. So the unconscious is not a place we control. It is a living realm we must enter, listen to, and emerge from, changed. Without the unconscious, there is no transformation, because the self we are meant to become already lives there, waiting. Every fairy tale that carries the mark of transformation leads, eventually, to a return, but not a return to the way things were. The hero or heroine comes back changed, often unrecognizable, even to themselves. They have faced trials, surrendered illusions, died in some symbolic form, and now something entirely new has emerged. This is the moment of rebirth, not as a return to innocence, but as the integration of experience. Marie-Louise von France emphasized that in Jungian psychology, the goal is not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness can only arise when the fragmented parts of the psyche are acknowledged, confronted, and integrated. The new self is not someone different from who we were. It is who we were meant to be all along, finally made visible. In fairy tales, this emergence is symbolized in many ways. The once silent girl finds her voice and breaks the spell. The orphaned boy claims his royal inheritance. The beast turns back into a prince, not because someone rescued him, but because love, courage, or inner truth transformed the curse. These are not happy endings in the superficial sense. They are psychological awakenings. The new self is stronger, but also softer. It does not rely on control, but on presence. It no longer needs to prove itself, because it has already become itself. This moment often includes the return of what was lost. A kingdom is restored, a family is reunited, or balance returns to the land. These symbols reflect the inner realignment that happens when the ego stops fighting the unconscious and starts listening to it. Something settles. There is now harmony between the inner and outer worlds. The outer victory mirrors an inner reconciliation. But this rebirth is not guaranteed. In many tales, the process fails if the hero resists transformation, if pride, fear, or denial block the descent. The path requires courage, humility, and endurance. Only then can the new self emerge, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. In modern life, we might not slay dragons or break enchantments, but we do survive grief, illness, loss, betrayal. We descend into confusion. We let go of versions of ourselves we clung to for years. And if we allow it, if we surrender to the process, something awakens in us. A clarity, a resilience, a truth that no longer needs to hide. This is the new self that emerges, not flawless, but real. It carries the scars of the journey, but those scars are no longer wounds. They are symbols of meaning, proof that the descent into darkness was not in vain. Fairy tales may feel like distant stories from another time, but their messages are deeply alive, echoing within your own soul. The death, the trials, the dark nights, and the rebirths you see on the page are not just plot devices. They are mirrors reflecting the transformations you face in your own life. Marie-Louise von France taught us that these stories reveal universal patterns rooted in the unconscious. The archetypes and symbols are not out there, but within you, waiting to be understood and integrated. Have you ever felt like the person you once were is no longer who you want to be? Have you experienced loss, pain, or upheaval that seemed like an ending? That is the call. That is the death of the old self, a necessary passage toward renewal. Maybe you're standing at a threshold now, uncertain, afraid, or resistant to change. The hero's journey is not just theirs, it is yours too. The symbolic death and rebirth are ongoing processes within every human life. Transformation requires surrender. It requires courage to face the unconscious shadows you might rather avoid. But it also offers something precious, the chance to become more whole, more authentic, more alive. Remember, the darkness is not the end of the story. It is the fertile ground where the new self grows. You do not have to wait for a fairy tale to find meaning in your challenges. They are already sacred stories playing out within you, your own epic tale of transformation. So, when you feel lost, remember, you are not alone. You are following a path walked by countless heroes and heroines before you. And the death you fear is not a final goodbye. It is a doorway to the new life waiting on the other side. The question is, will you answer the call? If this journey of transformation and rebirth resonates with you, don't just watch, join the conversation. Share your own stories of inner change in the comments below. What part of your old self have you had to let go of? How did it shape the person you are becoming? Subscribe and hit the notification bell to explore more timeless wisdom from Jung and von France that can guide your own heroic path. Your story matters here. Let's grow together.